Hi, Joel here. Welcome to Module 3 of the Team Fiddler course. This week we're going to talk about how competition can make your team stronger. We're going to talk about the curiosity mindset, and we're going to talk about building the fort. And all of these things are related because, among other things, they're all part of a McLuhan tetrad. At least you can write one, and I encourage you to write your own. But here's one: boredom, central concept, enhances awareness. Boredom obsoletes the excitement of the competition. Boredom retrieves the moth, silence, solitude. And when pushed to its extreme, boredom reverts to curiosity. Now, I'd like to tell you a story that happened in the early 2000s, I think so. A young teacher, Yuri Treisman, was at University of Berkeley. It was one of his first courses, and the story was published in a small newsletter from the SIAM Society, Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics. It's not good paper, it's not meant to be kept a long time, and I actually didn't have my copy anymore. Yuri found out that the students in calculus, first year calculus, had different rates of success based on their ethnicity. That the black American students, had a lower success rate than other students or even other minority students. And so that bothered them, and he decided to investigate, and they found out that the students who did very, very well had this structure where they would come to the lunch. I think they were honor students, all of them. They would come to the lunch and they would work out their problems together. And from time to time, one would bring a really difficult problem that he didn't know how to solve, and there was this competition, friendly competition, to actually solve the problem. And that competition, actually, I've seen it at my own school, those competition actually engender respect, because you see other people working hard, you see some people very smart, you see that you're not the only one having trouble, and so it creates bonds. The African American student, however, did not do this. They worked entirely alone, and they got discouraged. Trashman realized that the students had learned in high school to work alone and not get bothered by the activity around them. That, however, which had been good for them in high school, turned out to be deadly in university. So what they did instead, they formed labs, and they brought in the students who had trouble, and they gave them problems, but they didn't give them the solution. And they encouraged students to bring in problems that they themselves could not solve. And that generated quite a different atmosphere. And starting having fun doing those problems and competing. And by the end of the year, they were at the same level than any other student. Here's another example I'd like to tell you about, which is Mia Hamm. If you've been coaching soccer, you know about her. Mia Hamm was twice gold medalist at the Olympics, and she was twice on the winning team for the the FIFA women's national team. This is a soccer team. And she writes, "It is the responsibility of your teammate to nurture you through competition. The intensity and determination set the tone of your training environment, the crucible in which you as a player are formed." And she has another thing I'd like to share with you. I coach soccer, girls soccer, so I use that. That's where I found out that's one. Your love of the game in competition is not something that can be taught, but it can flourish when your coach, your parents, your teammates create a competitive learning environment in practice by making the game fun. So again, excellence goes through joy. I've heard as I coach people saying, children thinking that it's not nice to be competitive, it's not kind. There are other things which are not kind. One is obviously being over competitive. I had in my grad students and my graduate studies a total stranger come to me and ask me, "What are you studying?" And I said, "Oh, computer science." And he just walked away and said, "Oh, this is no good. There's no business in this. You're just wasting your time. Go leave to change another, take another field." Well, that was in the 90s. Computer science wasn't dead, and that was just a case of pathological competition. Then there's also being nice is not necessarily being kind. If you have someone, a friend who's starting a business and he's in a position where you would like to be told the truth square in your face because maybe your advertising marketing is poor or maybe there's something you're not thinking about and you really want a friend to tell you, well, that's not going to work. But instead you say, yeah, go ahead, you're a good guy, I like you, you'll make it work. Well, you're being nice, but you're not being kind. So competing does not need necessarily to be unkind. And here's another story about crows. If you ever got a crow chick and you try to feed it yourself, good luck. It's not going to take food from you. You have to really to shove it down. But if you had two crow chicks and you put them in front of each other, you give food to one, the other one will fight to get food too. You leverage their jealousy. But the same thing in terms of competition. If you have one person alone, they're happy, they're doing well, they know their adversary, and they just sit there. But if they actually compete, they start getting better and better and better and better and better. On the same theme of being worried that if you compete with somebody else, you're beating that person that's unfriendly. That depends how you consider things. If you look at competition as a war, a game that's played once, the war is purpose can a war can last 100 years, 1,000 years, but the purpose of the war is to annihilate completely the adversary. Competition is a game that you play over and over and over and over, and you don't want to stop playing it. Therefore, you try to make your opponent, in the process, you make your opponent better, so you can keep playing. Right. So if you're in a situation where you beat your friend, or you beat your colleague, well, you can use the same framework we talked about when we were talking about finger pointing. First, you solve the problem, which is beating your adversary. Then you look for the lesson learned. And then you share it. If the person is truly your friend and you found a way to beat that person, well, you share it with them so they can improve. Competition, taken in that sense, actually generates curiosity because you want to know why is it that this thing worked and this thing didn't work. So now you have a tiny little problem, very focused problem where you can actually try to understand it in great details, and that's typical of curiosity. What is not curiosity? Curiosity is not distraction. It's not binge scrolling. Binge scrolling is more like greed. You kind of accumulate that pleasure of doing this little thing, but you're not actually learning new things. Actually, that swiping makes it harder to learn new things. So it's quite the opposite of curiosity. I would say curiosity is love of understanding as opposed to love of novelty. Because you can be curious for 10, 20, 30, 40 years on a problem that you could not crack, and you still try to find out what the problem is, and you're still curious about it. So curiosity is not a matter of novelty. How does that work in practice? So we're going to go back to the snowfield, and we have, we're not up, we choose our players, we know what they like to do, what they don't like to do, what they're good at doing, and what they're not good at doing. So we have self-awareness, we have all the negotiation skills, and then we arrive at the park, and what is it? There's a little sign there that says, the city of Fremont has decided to ban all snowball fights. How can that be? Well, the sign says, we have made a scientific studies over 12 parks, sorry, mistake, and we compiled the number of games played per seasons and the number of rocks being thrown. And we found out that throughout Fremont we have per park, per season, 4 rocks being thrown, plus a 23% increase for each game being played. So basically, even each time you have 5 games played, you got 1 more rock being thrown. And the city's purpose is to provide a safe, enjoyable environment and not pay too much money in liability suits. I decided that they're closing all the snowball fights. The parents, though, however, see it differently because you see, they notice that the more their kids play snowball fights, the more sociable they become. And so that leads to a discussion. So one group of parents said, no. We observed that there's a decrease in the number of rocks being thrown by 21% per game played. So actually, if you play 5 games, there's 1 less rock being thrown. And some parents actually said, you know what? We noticed a 122 decrease in the number of rocks being thrown. So how come that could be? They're lying to us. They just don't want to spend money on maintaining the park. What is it? What's the problem? Of course, there's no snow falling in Fremont, in California. The coldest it gets is 40, maybe, Fahrenheit. But we went to the city hall and we said, you can't close the parks to snowball fights. And he says, yes, absolutely. We have proof, we have scientific proof that more snowball fights means more rocks being thrown, and we do not want rocks being thrown. And they showed us this data. This is their data, and you have the number of, in the first column, the number of games played during the season. In the second column, the number of rock incidents reported during the season. And they said to us, well, it's obvious that the more people play in the park, the more kids play in the park, the more rocks are being thrown. Therefore, we said no. And we asked the city hall, well, what about the 23, 28, 30 runs per season, fights per season? These have low numbers. How is that? I said, well, we don't care. We see a trend, and that's, numbers are number, but the science doesn't lie. So we went on and we looked at the data, but from a different perspective. We drew a little chart, and you can see here that this is the equation for the city claims a 23% increase in number of rock throwing compared to the number of games played during the season. But obviously there's something wrong. You got one trend here, sorry. You've got one trend here, and you got another trend here. The green points are kids who like to build fancy castles and role play, And the blue points are kids who just like to go in the snow and throw as much snow as they can in the face of others and come back home and have hot chocolate. So there's differences. Now the city might say, well, you know what? We're going to make a cutoff line here at 10. Anybody who plays uh, more than 10 games is verboten in the city. That might work, you know, it's a democratic society. On the other hand, if you're careful at this, you'll see that, let me move this thing out back. You'll notice that the castle kids started having 3 rocks sent in one game, whereas the um, snow fight, snowball fight kids started with 1 rock thrown on each game. So actually they're more socialized than the castle kids. So are you penalizing the kids who just like to throw snow in the face of others versus the kids who prefer to have the more fancy um, kind of game, more intellectual kind of game? And that leads to other discussions. So this is an example where curiosity makes you look into more detail and see that there may be some cause and effects involved in here rather than just doing a blunt um, curve fitting to data that may actually not be appropriate for curve fitting. So in the end, we do get to build our forts and we do get to throw some snow. And that will be the module 4. So this is a well-known paradox of statistics called the Simpson paradox. Now I have some games because I said, you know, general question and then some games. I do have some games. One is to, actually I have 1, 2, 3, 4 games I want to tell you. One is to re-engineer stories. So you remember the story about the 2 guys who were running because the bear was behind them? Well, that story never ended, is it? What about the bear perspective? Can you rewrite the story in terms of the bear? Like, for instance, the bear was coming out of the blueberry field. He was stuffed when he came across those 2 guys. Or maybe the guy didn't have his boots, not because he was working barefoot all the time, but maybe the bear used the boots to get out of trouble without being noticed. Try to rewrite that story. Talking allegorically. This allégoriquement. I know how to do it in French, but not in English. Um, speaking through allegories, also called as speaking nonsense. Not everybody can do that, so I don't advise you. If you know how to do it, do it. It's basically answering questions with the most silly answer you can find. So if somebody says to me, "Oh, you had to leave out your boots to enter the home. Are your feet? Do you want some slippers? Are your feet cold?" You might answer, "No, no, I left my feet in my boots. I'm fine with that." Makes no sense, but actually it creates some atmosphere where you actually can propose things which are totally nonsensical but turn out to be good. So it's actually conductive of brainstorming. But you have to be careful with that because sometimes people have angers that you're not aware of, and the anger can come up in images. At that point, you need to say, okay, do we let it go and stop the game, or do we let the person uh, expand on that thought and figure out, maybe as a team, we can figure out what the problem is. Not being a psychologist, I'm not advising you that, but it's quite, if you're able to do it, it's quite a blast to do. It's very fun. Keep a journal of things you don't get, things you don't understand. Keep a journal, and then sometimes share it with someone. Say, you know what? Why is it, say, that the sunset is never green? And you might find a photographer who tells you, well, I do have one where actually there's a green flare, but things that you don't understand, things that you don't get, write them down. You might find a pattern, or you might find a friend, one or the other. Google search competition, because before 1994, 93, the smartest man in town had the smartest answer to tell. But after Google and the web, the smartest man in town has the best question to ask. And then it's a good way to see who is most distracted when doing searches. That's another one for you. Yes, your mind is a knife. So that's kind of a solo thing, but it actually helps if you have other people doing it with you. Be careful about blunt thinking. Like somebody writes, what if reality had multiple answers? Well, reality is not a question. You cannot have an answer. Be alert on this because actually you'll find it a lot of people, a lot of journals, a lot of articles have basically fuzzy thinking. And actually blunting your mind is a way to not actually observing things which actually enable your curiosity, which actually eventually would enable you to have a better, deeper understanding of the world around you. So that's that. I thank you very much. I'm going to put a few links in this course with the video and see you for the fourth one. Take care. Bye.